The girl had been wagered like cattle, her life tossed into the dust with the turn of a card. The saloon was loud with men's laughter, yet her silence cut deeper than their jeers. She sat rigid in a chair, wrists bound, hair falling like a veil of fire to hide her face. Across the table, the gambler who had staked her licked his lips with fevered anticipation, as though victory could stitch together the ruin of his debts. The final hand was dealt, and fortune, so cruel to her, tilted toward a stranger. The rancher did not cheer when he laid down his cards. He was 35, broad-shouldered and weathered by solitude, a man whose skin carried the sun and whose eyes carried absence. He gathered his winnings without flourish, his silence heavier than the smoke curling toward the rafters. When the hush settled, every gaze turned to him, and to the woman whose fate had been sealed. She did not lift her head. She had already imagined the roughness of hands that would claim her. But no hand came. Instead, the rancher stood, removed his hat as if in church, and offered her his palm. It was not ownership, but invitation. She hesitated, bound still by rope and by terror, until his voice, low, steady, unexpected, told the dealer to cut her ties. The man obeyed, though mutters of disbelief rippled through the room. She touched her raw wrists, uncertain if freedom or bondage awaited. Outside, the air was cold with dust and hoarse sweat. He did not speak to her as they mounted. The hooves struck rhythm against the prairie, carrying them away from the glow of the saloon. She dared a glance at him, sharp jaw, eyes that never lingered too long, the gravity of a man who had forgotten laughter. She expected him to gloat, to brand her with words of possession. Instead, he rode in silence, as though she were not prize but burden. Hours later, they reached the ranch. Its fences leaned with fatigue, the barn sagged, and the house stood like a widow holding its breath. He dismounted first, offering her his hand again. She did not take it, not yet. Inside, he led her not to a shack or corner but to a room dusted yet preserved, the remnants of a woman's touch long gone, embroidered curtains, a Bible on the shelf, a quilt folded with care. His mother's room, though he did not say so. Here, he left her. Water sat in a basin, bread on the table. The door closed without lock. She pressed her back against it, waiting for the sound of return, for the demand, for the cruelty men so easily mask with duty. It never came. Only the lonely creak of the wind through old wood. Morning found him outside, feeding cattle, hammering at a broken trough. She lingered by the porch, the sun glinting on her copper hair, watching the rhythm of his labor. He glanced once, then bent to work. He did not ask her name, nor offer his. Yet when hunger came, he left food on the table. When cold crept in, fire already burned. She began mending curtains, sewing cloth, not from command but to soften the silence. Slowly, the house became less tomb, more dwelling. Days passed. They spoke little. She measured him in the quiet, the way he laid his tools in order, the care he gave the animals, the solitude he carried like armor. His silence was not cruelty but a wound, and wounds she understood. He never reached for her, never tested the invisible line between them. That unsettled her more than roughness would have. One evening, the sky broke open with a storm. Thunder rolled across the valley, shaking the brittle glass panes. She found him outside, rain cutting down his face, fighting against the wind to mend a fence before it collapsed. The ground was mud, the posts heavy, and still he worked alone. Without thought, she stepped into the tempest, skirts plastered to her legs, hair whipping against her cheeks. She took hold of the wood, her hands trembling but firm. He looked at her, surprise flickering, but said nothing. Together, they forced the post into place as lightning carved the sky white. Their fingers touched, slick with rain, clinging for a moment longer than need demanded. Neither pulled away. In the roaring storm, in the hammer of thunder, something shifted. They stood when the work was done, drenched, silent, eyes locked not as captor and captive, but as two souls who had stumbled against one another in the wilderness. And in that fragile silence, she felt it for the first time, not freedom yet, not safety, but the faint echo of something rarer. The possibility of being seen. The night came with gunfire, sharp and sudden, tearing through the calm of the prairie. Horses screamed outside, hooves pounding against the dirt, and drunken voices split the silence of the ranch. She woke with her heart leaping, fear coursing through her body like fire. For a breath she thought it was the storm returned, until she heard the laughter, the threats, the names spat into the dark. They had come for her, the men from the saloon who still claimed her as their prize. She stumbled to the window, and the lantern glow revealed them, 5 riders swaying with whiskey and rage. Their guns gleamed, their eyes feral. The rancher stood on the porch alone, hat pulled low, hands steady at his sides. He did not shout or beg. His stillness was a blade sharper than any weapon. She pressed her hand to the glass, a prayer caught in her throat, as they demanded she be given back. He answered with silence first, then with words carved clean as stone. She is no man's winnings. She is free now. His voice carried over the thunder of their horses, low but unshakable, a sound that rooted itself in her bones. The men jeered, spat into the dirt, lifted their pistols high. She felt her breath falter, but he did not move, only lifted his chin to the night as though daring fate itself to come closer. The Irishwoman ran to the door, her bare feet cold on the wooden floor. She stepped beside him, her hand trembling as it found his arm. In that single act, she made her choice, not to hide, not to flee, but to stand. His muscles were taut beneath her touch, yet her presence steadied him like reins on a wild horse. The riders saw her then, saw the way she leaned into him, not out of fear but defiance, and their laughter faltered. The air grew heavier, thick with the weight of decision. One wrong twitch and blood would soak the earth. He spoke again, slower now, measured, telling them they would leave without her, that their claim ended with the fall of that final hand of cards. The wind carried his words into the night, each syllable wrapped in the authority of a man who had nothing but would not yield even that. One of them, younger, hot-headed, reached for his gun. The sound of a hammer clicking back was enough to stop him. The rancher had drawn, not with haste but with certainty, his revolver steady, his eyes unblinking. The standoff stretched thin, every heartbeat a drum against the silence. The Irishwoman felt her throat tighten, her hand still on his arm, sensing the storm in his veins. He had lived alone so long, but now he was not alone, and that truth gave him the weight of mountains. At last, the leader spat into the dirt, muttered curses, and pulled his reins. One by one, the others followed, their bravado unraveling beneath the gaze of a man who refused to bend. The thunder of hooves receded into the horizon, leaving only the whisper of the wind and the faint trembling of her breath. He holstered his weapon slowly, shoulders slumping as the tension bled away. She turned to him, her eyes shining in the lantern light, the storm of fear replaced by something fiercer. He had not won her that night. He had given her back to herself. That realization struck her deeper than any chain, deeper than any cruelty she had endured. Freedom was not the cutting of bonds but the gift of dignity. They stood there in the hush of the aftermath, the world narrowed to the quiet between them. She felt the words rise to her lips, words she had held too long, words she had never thought to speak to any man. Yet before she could release them, he turned his face away, as though afraid of what her gaze might see in him. The dawn would come soon, painting the fields in gold, but for now they lingered in the half-light of a choice neither could step back from. She knew then the greatest danger was not the guns of other men but the truth already blooming in her chest. She had not been won. She had chosen to stay. And though the night had ended, their story had only just begun.